The stomach swallowed a live cat whole, leaving not a scratch on the lips. Fur and bones slid down the narrow passage, which in reality turned out to be a wide shaft capable of accepting an entire log. The air in the room grew heavy with the smell of iron and rot, while the man on the bed did not even move his fingers. His eyes remained open, holding neither pain nor pleasure, only an empty thirst stretching from the very depths of the abdominal cavity. Outside the window stood the year 1789, and in the ward of the military infirmary, they were already preparing to call this madness. No one understood how flesh could stretch without tearing, how jaw bones could part without crunching, how food disappeared in the darkness leaving no trace on the scales. The body was slowly digesting itself from within. Physicians in worn coats recorded every movement, every muscle contraction, but their pens hovered frozen over the paper. They sought the cause in fever, in poisoning by heavy metals, or in a hereditary curse, but no theory withstood the test of direct observation. The mattress beneath the sick man's back was soaked with sweat and an oily liquid, emitting an acrid aroma of melted wax and old blood. The skin on his face stretched tight over his cheekbones, turning features into a frozen mask, yet the mouth remained wet and pliable, ready to accept a new victim without the slightest resistance. From the corner of the ward came a quiet scratching of rodents, but the sounds did not frighten, they attracted. The head turned slowly, the neck emitting a dry crack similar to breaking dry branches. Fingers gripped the edges of the coarse sheet, crumpling the fabric until the abdominal muscles began to contract convulsively. Daylight broke through the dirty glass, illuminating dusty particles circling over the cot as if over the altar of a forgotten cult. Copper instruments on the small table clinked from the draft, reminding those present of the inevitable intervention they feared so much. The surgeon stood at the threshold, clasping in his hand an open diary where ink lines had long since turned into an incoherent list of the impossible. He saw how the chest rose and fell in a rhythm completely mismatched with the beating of the heart. The swallowed creature offered no resistance. It simply disappeared, dissolving in an acid abyss that did not obey the laws of anatomy. The belly swelled only for a moment, then subsided, leaving behind a flat surface covered with a network of dark vessels. Inside occurred not digestion, but absorption, the rebirth of matter into the pure energy of insatiable hunger. The body demanded not food for the maintenance of life, but substance for expanding the boundaries of its own existence. Steps sounded in the corridor, heavy and hesitant, belonging to those who had come to relieve the observers. They carried new trays on which lay raw pieces of meat, dried roots, scraps of skin obtained in the damp cellars of the fortress. Each item was merely fuel for the bottomless furnace. The sick man did not turn his head. But his breathing quickened, turning into an even whistle vibrating in the throat. The walls of the stone ward kept silence, absorbing the whispers of frightened orderlies, but could not hide the growing pressure from within. The flesh trembled, foreshadowing a new wave of swallowing, and the shadow on the floor stretched out like a black river ready to swallow everything in its path. No one yet knew that this hunger had no bottom, and that each gulp only opened gates into a bottomless darkness from which there was no return. Candles on the wall flickered, casting trembling shadows on stone walls covered with mold and old records of previous prisoners. Heat from the sick man's body rose upward, distorting the air, making it dense and suffocating. Observers felt how inside themselves awakened a vague unease, as if alien hunger seeped through the walls, penetrating their own stomachs. They retreated toward the door, trying not to look toward the cot, but their gaze involuntarily returned to the expanding maw. The clock on the tower struck noon, but in the ward time stopped, frozen in expectation of the next act of absorption. The patient's hands lay on the blanket, fingers slowly clenching and unclenching as if sorting invisible grains. The skin on the palms covered with small cracks from which oozed a transparent liquid smelling of ozone and earth. The infirmary held its breath, understanding that before it lay not a disease, but an ancient mechanism launched by man himself. The darkness inside the chest cavity no longer hid. It waited. The village on the outskirts of Paris had long erased his real name from memory, leaving only a heavy nickname whispered behind tightly shuttered windows. The sound of his name was feared to be spoken aloud, as if it possessed the power to awaken hunger in those who heard it. Fog creeping across the marshy meadows concealed the tracks of his bare feet, leaving only impressions in the damp earth and a strange metallic taste on the tongues of passers-by. The fields around the settlement were trampled flat, gardens dug down to the clay, orchard trees gnawed to their stumps. Local residents had long stopped looking out their windows at night, knowing that the shadow by the fence did not beg for alms but waited for the door to open on its own. He wandered the outskirts, gathering rotten root vegetables, gnawing the bark of old oaks, devouring everything in his path without distinguishing the living from the dead. Fingers coated in crusts of dirt and dried blood grabbed dead rats, tore rotting fabrics, shoved pieces of rusted iron and shards of broken pottery into his mouth. His jaws worked tirelessly, tendons in his neck bulging like ropes, swallowing motions resembling the pumping of a blacksmith's bellows. No one saw him truly chew. Food simply plunged into a bottomless depth, leaving on his lips only a thin film of saliva and dust. The earth beneath his feet seemed exhausted, the air around it vibrating with a quiet, continuous smacking sound audible even through the wind. Peasants nailed their barn doors shut, sealed cracks with clay and ash, installed heavy wooden bolts capable of withstanding a bull's impact. They believed the scent of grain or straw could attract him, so they stored supplies in cellars draped with damp burlap. Physicians from the nearest town sent urgent dispatches to medical institutes in the capital, describing symptoms that did not fit within the framework of known ailments. The reports contained records of extraordinary tissue elasticity, the absence of a gag reflex, and a strange warmth emanating from the abdominal cavity even in the bitterest frosts. Officials in Paris reread the papers, crossed themselves, ordered them to wait for instructions. But the orders arrived too late, and hunger waited for no permission. Guard soldiers assigned to watch the surroundings did not dare approach closer than 3 steps, gripping their muskets with trembling hands. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat, their boots stuck in the mud, and their gazes were involuntarily drawn to the figure hunched at the edge of a ditch. Fear paralyzed their will, turning disciplined men into static figures unable to carry out a direct order. The commander gave the order only when the figure began approaching the well, threatening to contaminate the settlement's only water source. They prepared thick ropes, tarred canvas, and a heavy iron hook, but no tool touched his skin of its own volition. In the end, they wrapped him in a coarse hemp sack sewn from 3 panels, soaked in tar and salt to prevent escape. The sack was dragged across the ground, pulled through thorny bushes and sharp stones, and from within came no moans or resistance, only a damp rustling and heavy breathing. They loaded him onto a cart with wooden wheels rimmed with iron, harnessed 2 skinny nags that trembled at the proximity of the unknown cargo. The road led through impassable mud, under pouring rain that turned ruts into rivers of murky water, washing away tracks but not cleansing the air. The cart creaked, sinking into the mire, while the sack on the bed slowly swelled, absorbing moisture and the heavy scent of inner emptiness. The gates of the military infirmary swung open with the screech of rusty hinges, admitting the cart into an inner courtyard paved with wet cobblestones. Orderlies in oilskin coats hastily carried the burden across the threshold, bypassing corridors that smelled of carbolic acid and old wood. There, they isolated him from the outside world, leaving him in a stone room with high vaulted ceilings and a single window barred with thick iron grating. The door was locked with 3 heavy bolts, the gaps stuffed with felt, and a thin layer of sawdust was spread on the floor, which instantly absorbed moisture and took on a dark hue. The room became a tomb for a living being, where the echo of footsteps died under the pressure of heavy, measured breathing. His belly swelled and subsided like an ocean tide, obeying unknown lunar cycles rather than the needs of digestion. The skin over his ribs thinned to the limit, becoming transparent like parchment soaked in oil, revealing dark veins pulsing to the rhythm of another's hunger. His pulse could not be felt at the wrist but deep in the groin area, sending dull thuds against the stone walls. His limbs seemed waxen, devoid of muscle tone, but the muscles of his jaw and throat remained tense, ready for instant contraction. His body temperature neither rose nor fell. It remained constant, as if the body operated by internal clocks independent of the surrounding environment. Physicians observed through the thick frosted glass set in the wall opposite the cot, recording notes in leather-bound volumes with trembling hands. They noted respiratory rate, marked changes in skin color, measured the time between contractions of the abdominal wall, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. Oil lamps with smoky wicks cast long shadows on the ceiling, and ink on the paper blurred from dampness, turning lines into dark smears. No one dared enter for an examination, fearing not so much a bite as the invisible attraction emanating from the center of the figure. The notes turned into a catalog of anomalies, where each new symptom refuted the previous diagnosis. They did not suspect they were recording not a disease, not a developmental defect, nor the result of prolonged starvation, but the slow awakening of an ancient mechanism. The body was not suffering. It was adapting, restructuring internal organs for new tasks, turning the stomach into a reservoir capable of holding not only food, but the very essence of consumption. Blood grew thicker, lymph acquired a metallic taste, nerve endings redirected signals to a single control center. The observer's fear was not instinctive but a reflection of another's will penetrating through the glass, through the paper, through their own thoughts. Each breath behind the wall resonated in their chests, forcing them to swallow saliva with reluctance. Night shifts became unbearable. The silence of the ward pressed harder than any scream, and the shadow on the floor grew, ignoring the position of the candles. Duty physicians changed places every 4 hours, but sleep did not come. Thoughts circled around one question about the nature of what lay behind the wall. They checked the locks, wiped the glass, recounted instruments, but hands reached involuntarily into pockets where personal items lay, as if hunger could cross over through material objects. Reports contained lines about hallucinations, whispers behind the back, a strange taste of copper on the tongue, but superiors attributed this to fatigue and harmful vapors. Reality distorted itself, adjusting to the rhythm of breathing in the stone room. Walls became covered with frost even on summer days, stone slabs cracked from internal tension, and wooden floors sagged under invisible weight. The air in the corridor grew heavy, saturated with particles that settled on clothing, leaving dark stains that could not be washed out. Birds did not land on the infirmary's windowsill. Dogs gave the building a wide berth, and rats disappeared from the cellars on the very first night after his arrival. Nature instinctively retreated, yielding place to something that did not fit into the cycle of life but stood apart, consuming and processing matter without residue. Even the rain outside the window changed its rhythm, tapping on the glass with even, mechanical precision. Inside the stone cell, not decay but transmutation occurred, where every swallowed object lost its original form, turning into fuel for an invisible flame. Bones were ground to powder, metal dissolved in the acidic environment, fabric disintegrated into fibers that wove themselves into a new structure. Organs shifted, making room for an expanding cavity that resembled not a stomach but a gate leading to a space devoid of dimensions. Pulsation intensified with each minute, transmitting vibrations into the floor, the walls, the air, making lamps tremble and glass cloud over. Observers felt their own stomachs clench in response, like an echo of another's rhythm. The chief surgeon tried to compile a diagram of the changes, drawing lines on parchment that did not converge, forming closed circles and impossible angles. His assistants brought new data, but the numbers did not add up into a table. They scattered like living creatures refusing to submit to logic. Instruments dulled in their hands, scalpels became coated with a film that could not be wiped away, and scales showed 0 even when lead weights were placed on the pan. They understood that medicine was powerless before a phenomenon that could not be treated, diagnosed, or described in academic treatises. All that remained was to watch, record, and wait for the moment when the mechanism would finish its adjustment. The room turned into a vessel where time flowed differently, slowing at the threshold, accelerating at the head of the bed, dissolving boundaries between day and night. The silhouette behind the glass barely changed position, Only the ribcage rose and fell, marking the beats of an invisible metronome. Shadows in the corners thickened, turning into dense clumps that did not react to light but absorbed it, making space deeper. The air became so dense that breathing required effort, inhaling not oxygen but anticipation. No one spoke a word, but everyone in the corridor knew that silence did not mean peace. It meant preparation. Dawn brought no relief, only a gray sky coloring the walls the shade of ash, while the grating cast a long shadow on the stone slab. Physicians stood at the glass, holding new sheets in their hands, ready to record the next stage, which had no name in their dictionaries. The belly froze in tense convexity, as if filled to the limit, ready either to burst or to open. Veins under the skin filled with dark light, pulse evened out, breathing became steady as a taut string. The infirmary froze, holding its breath, as the first rays of sun touched the marble table in the neighboring cabinet, where baskets of supplies already lay. Experiments began at dawn when gray rays of light touched the stone floor of the ward. Heavy baskets filled with fresh apples, pieces of raw meat, bundles of coarse ropes, and old books in leather bindings were brought into the room. The air filled with the scent of raw flesh and dust, mixed with the aroma of fruit that seemed out of place in this place of death. Orderlies placed trays on tables, their hands trembling, eyes avoiding direct contact with the figure lying on the cot. Silence was dense, like water, pressing on the ears, broken only by the creak of wooden legs on stone. They retreated to the door, awaiting the start of a process meant to answer questions tormenting the best minds of the capital. He consumed everything indiscriminately, not chewing, not swallowing, but as if drawing objects into a bottomless funnel formed instead of an esophagus. Apples disappeared whole, skin unbroken, seeds uncrushed, as if the solidity of the fruit became soft upon touching lips. Pieces of meat slid down, leaving only traces of fat on the chin, instantly absorbed into skin pores. Ropes went inside in knots, knots stuck in the throat, books unfolded in a stream of paper, vanishing into the darkness of the gullet. Movements were smooth, mechanical, devoid of human spasms typical of the act of eating. It seemed the body did not accept food but erased it from reality, turning matter into nothing. Tables groaned under leftovers not yet served, yet his waist remained unnaturally thin, as if food dissolved in air immediately after crossing lips. The belly did not swell, did not heavify, did not change shape, remaining flat and hollow despite kilograms of consumed load. Clothes hung on the body like a sack, emphasizing limb thinness contrasting with the volume of destroyed objects. Observers rubbed eyes, disbelief in own vision, checked scales, rearranged weights, but result remained same. Mass disappeared, leaving no trace in physiology, not turning into energy, not storing in tissues. Law of conservation of matter was violated before their eyes in the cold ward of the military infirmary. Physicians measured pulse, weighed stool, recorded temperature, but digits did not add up to a picture understandable to human mind. Pulse slowed to few beats per minute, then accelerated to tremor, then vanished altogether for several moments. Temperature fluctuated from icy cold to heat capable of melting candle wax on windowsill. Body weight did not increase, though hundreds of pounds of food, water, metal, and fabric went inside. Records and journals turned into set of contradictory data, where each line refuted previous one, creating labyrinth without exit. Medics felt ground slipping from under feet, foundation of science cracking under pressure of unexplainable. The body resisted death, ignoring laws of nature, demanding more weight, more volume, more darkness. It did not need nutrients, did not seek vitamins or proteins. It demanded mass as such substance for filling inner emptiness. Every swallowed object worsened hunger, igniting it anew, forcing muscles to contract stronger. Patient eyes remained open, pupils dilated, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. There was no life in usual understanding, only deep, ancient need for filling infinite space inside. This was not organism striving to survive. This was mechanism striving to consume. In middle of trials, he ate a copper bowl, swallowed glass shards, drank a bucket of vinegar, and no object caused vomiting. Copper clinked against teeth, then vanished, leaving no taste of metal on tongue. Glass passed through throat, not cutting mucosa, leaving no blood on chin. Vinegar was drunk in one gulp, liquid vanished, not burning esophagus, not causing cough or spasm. Acid should have destroyed tissues, should have caused painful agony, but face remained impassive, like a mask. Internal environment of organism proved more aggressive than any acid, capable of dissolving solidity of material world without residue. Lab assistants retreated to wall, understanding that before them stood not a patient, but a gate leading to place where gravity and logic ceased to exist. They pressed backs to cold stone, feeling vibration from patient body transmitting through floor. Instruments in hands became heavier, as if gravity around cot intensified, pulling metal to center of room. Papers on tables moved without wind, turning pages themselves, as if invisible fingers sought data. Air thickened, became viscous, hindering breathing, filling lungs with lead heaviness. They realized they were not in presence of disease, but on threshold of something that should not touch ground. Lamp light flickered, though wicks were filled with oil, shadows stretched toward cot, as if striving to join consumption. Every object vanishing in body took with it part of reality, making space around more fragile. Sounds outside faded, bird cries cut off, steps in corridor became muffled, as if world behind wall receded. Time flowed unevenly, seconds stretched into hours, hours compressed into moments, disrupting clock hands on tower. Observers felt disorientation, loss of connection with own bodies, as if their own limbs became alien. Boundary between observer and object erased, dissolving in common field of tension. Chief surgeon tried to maintain composure, dictating new parameters to assistants, but voice sounded alien, detached. He looked at instrument scales, needles rotating chaotically, indicating no known value. Mercury in thermometers rose above glass, flowed out, gathered in drops crawling along table to edge. Magnetic compasses brought for field checks spun disorderly, pointing to all cardinal directions simultaneously. Electric discharges ran along metal instruments, making them ring in unison with belly pulsation. Physics of room was rewritten, Newton laws yielded to something more ancient and dark. They noticed dust in light rays did not settle but hung in air, forming complex geometric figures around patient head. These figures changed with every breath, complicating, turning into patterns resembling maps of unknown star systems. Books lying on table opened themselves on pages with anatomy drawings, but pictures on them changed before eyes. Organs on paper shifted, vanished, turned into empty cavities repeating structure of what lay on cot. Knowledge locked in bindings flowed out, feeding process becoming part of experiment. Information was consumed as easily as matter, turning into fuel for insatiable womb. Fear changed to reverent horror when they understood experiment was controlled not by them, but by what was inside body. They were not researchers but feeders, providing resource for growth of something greater. Attempts to stop food supply met silent resistance. Locks on doors trembled. Handles turned themselves. Baskets emptied faster than filled. Infirmary supplies melted before eyes, requiring replenishment from city warehouses. City began feeling shortage. Markets emptied. Barns opened at night themselves. Contents vanished without trace. Hunger exited ward limits, spread to streets, penetrated homes, touched every resident with invisible thread. Evening fell on infirmary, but inside ward light was not required, for body itself emitted dim, violet glow. Skin became translucent. Through it showed not organs but emptiness, deep and absolute. Veins pulsed with black light, rhythm matching heartbeat of everyone present in room. They felt own life forces leaking, flowing into center of room, becoming part of common process. Resisting was useless, will was suppressed, mind clouded by impact of invisible waves. They stood, unable to move, watching reality around them finely tuned to needs of devourer. Notes and journals became incoherent, ink dried instantly, paper yellowed and crumbled at touch. Words lost meaning, Letters crawled to neighboring lines, forming new combinations having no value in human language. This was language of emptiness, grammar of disappearance, syntax of non-being, written by hand of human who lost control over fingers. Surgeon looked at own notes and did not recognize handwriting, did not remember moments when writing these lines. Memory of last hours was fragmentary, as if torn from context of life, left to mercy of fate. Time lost linearity, past and future mixed in single moment of eternal hunger. They understood gates were not fully open, that this was only beginning of process, only first stage of awakening. What was inside was not yet satiated, it only warmed up muscles, checked vessel capacity. Expectation of next stage hung in air heavier than lead, pressing on shoulders, bending spines, forcing to look at floor. No one dared voice a loud thought about what would happen when capacity was exhausted. What would occur when vessel could not withstand pressure of accumulated matter and energy gathered from nothing. Explosion, absorption of world, collapse of reality into one point where only variants of end approaching inevitably. Night passed without sleep, eyes of observers burned with feverish shine, bodies trembled from exhaustion, but no one could leave. Invisible connection held them in room, chained to places, making hostages of own curiosity and fear. Morning came unnoticed, light became brighter, but shadows did not disappear. They only changed angle, pointing to cot. Patient lay motionless. Belly again became flat, as if nothing happened overnight, as if all mass dissolved. But air remained heavy. Taste of copper on tongue did not vanish. Vibration in bones did not cease. Experiment did not end. It passed into new phase, invisible to eye, but palpable to every body cell. Lab assistants looked at empty baskets, at stained tables, at instruments covered with strange deposit. They understood there was no return path, that science reached dead end with no exit through logic. Remained only to observe, record, wait for moment when gates would open fully, and what was inside would step out. Or inward, into depths of cosmos, dragging behind all that has weight, form, and name. Fear changed to expectation of inevitable, calmness of doomed who accepted their fate as due. They stood at threshold of abyss, looking into it, and abyss looked at them in response, not blinking. Chapter ended with silence, but this was not silence of peace, but silence of predator crouching before jump. In infirmary corridors steps froze, birds did not sing outside window, wind did not rustle in tree branches. World held breath, feeling approach of something that would change order of things forever. Digits on clock stopped, hands froze in position not corresponding to time of day. Reality around became fragile, ready to crack from any careless movement, from any loud sound. They waited, knowing next gulp would be last for this world as they knew it. Hunger turned into rage when supplies ran out completely, and baskets remained empty as if licked by the tongue of an invisible beast. Provisions brought from city warehouses vanished faster than stocks could be replenished, leaving physicians bewildered before empty pantry shelves. Air in the ward grew heavy with tension, saturated with static presaging a storm meant to break within stone walls. Silence was no longer calm. It became strained like a string ready to snap at the slightest touch. Every patient breath sounded like metal scraping stone, filling corridors with vibration that made window panes tremble. The window grate began to rust from moisture of his breath, staining deep brown like dried blood on old iron. Condensation drops slid down bars, leaving corrosion traces eating metal faster than time allowed. The window seemed the only exit but became a trap where air turned to acid-eating barriers. Light penetrating through dirty glass grew dim, stained with rust and rot shades, making the room resemble insides of an old mechanism. No one dared approach closer, fearing breath might touch their skin and leave indelible marks. He gnawed wooden shelves, turning hard wood into soft mush, disappearing into the gullet without resistance. Sound of breaking wood echoed through the ward, disturbing night peace of guards standing at the door. Splinters and sawdust mixed with saliva forming dark mass not stuck in throat but plunging into abyss. Furniture around him became lighter, lost shape, turned to dust absorbed by skin pores or mouth. Room emptied, leaving only bare walls, which also began changing color under impact of heat emanating from the body. He drew water from the walls, leaving behind dry mold spots instantly blackening and crumbling to floor. Stone masonry lost moisture, becoming fragile like ancient parchment ready to crumble at touch. Cracks crawled along plaster, expanding every hour as if walls tried to shrink space around hunger source. Moisture gathered in his body but did not stay there, used as fuel for internal process defying explanation. Dampness in corner vanished. Air became dry and hot, burning lungs of those daring to enter for examination. He consumed own hair and nails until skin resembled burnt parchment stretched over sharp bones. Body thinned, losing last flesh reserves, but muscle strength did not decrease, growing fueled by unknown energy source. Fingers curled, turning into claws, scratching mattress to wood, leaving deep grooves in fabric. Face changed beyond recognition. Features sharpened. Eyes sank deep into skull, but light in them did not fade, growing brighter. This was not life fading, but concentration of entire essence into single point of desire. Physicians tried to bandage his mouth, applied coarse leather straps binding jaws with force capable of holding a wild beast. Knots tightened to limit. Skin around mouth whitened from pressure, but facial muscles did not flinch under external force. Straps began tearing, threads bursting one after another, unable to withstand tension coming from depth of jaw joints. Attempts to immobilize body met resistance, seeming unnatural for a human in such state of exhaustion. Every knot untied itself as if invisible fingers worked inside fabric, freeing path for hunger. They administered opium, hoping to asleep consciousness, plunge body into deep sleep to stop consumption process. Needle entered vein, liquid injected into blood, but pupils did not constrict. Breath did not become even and quiet. Drug vanished in system, dissolving without trace, having no impact on nerve activity of brain. Eyes remained open, fixing every movement in room, watching those trying to interfere with nature of phenomenon. Sleep did not come. Instead came phase of heightened activity when body demanded release of accumulated energy. Throat muscles contracted stronger, breaking holding devices with sound resembling crunch of dry branches underfoot on winter night. Metal buckles bent, wood cracked, leather straps tore, freeing neck for new lunge forward. Pressure inside gullet grew, creating vacuum capable of sucking air along with foreign objects found nearby. No barriers could stop flow, directed from center of body outward, demanding filling of emptiness. Safety devices became useless junk scattered on floor around cot, testimony of futility of efforts. In silence of night duty, he crawled under door, leaving trail of blood and slime glowing in dark with weak phosphorescent shade. Body slid along floor, making no friction sound, like liquid flowing over obstacle, changing shape as needed. Door was locked, but gap below proved sufficient for passage of emaciated figure having lost human outlines. Orderlies at threshold did not notice movement, absorbed by own thoughts and fear until hearing rustle in corridor. Trail led into darkness, pointing way to place where tools capable of cutting flesh were kept. Reaching surgical cabinet, he stopped, feeling scent of sterile metal and cold stone coming from closed doors. Cabinet stood at end of corridor, lit only by moon breaking through high window of stairwell. Cabinet doors were locked, but lock did not withstand touch of fingers covered in sticky substance eating iron. Metal rang, falling to floor, scattering into small parts, instantly vanishing in shadow at threshold. Inside lay instruments shining in semi-darkness, ready for use, but not for healing but for consumption. He did not stop forcing into himself scalpels, tweezers, silver mirrors until ribs cracked from internal pressure. Sharp blades entered gullet, not cutting it, but dissolving in acidic environment existing inside body. Sound of falling metal mixed with wet smacking, creating rhythm, making teeth ache for those hearing it from afar. Silver of mirrors dulled, losing reflective ability, turning into gray mass assimilated by organism without residue. Every object vanished, adding weight to internal structure, swelling not outside but inside, expanding cavity space. Ribs cracked, spreading apart to accommodate new volumes. Skin stretched to limit, becoming transparent in some places. Dark silhouettes of tools shone through covers, not lying static but moving, shifting inside abdominal cavity. It seemed they became part of mechanism, gears in clocks counting time to end of experiment. Pressure grew threatening to tear body apart, but integrity maintained by force exceeding physiological norms. Pain did not reflect on face, remaining mask of calm amidst chaos of internal destruction. In morning they found him in corner, curled into ball with eyes directed to ceiling where simple wooden cross hung. Body lay on cold stone floor surrounded by glass shards and metal shavings remaining from cabinet. Pose was unnatural, limbs tucked to belly. Head thrown back, opening access to throat for last breath. Dawn light fell on face, illuminating frozen expression that could not be called suffering or peace. It was face of one who saw something beyond understanding and now kept the secret inside. Body stopped breathing. Chest did not rise. Air did not enter lungs, frozen in state of complete peace. Pulse not felt on wrists. Skin cooled, acquiring color of dead wax, devoid of life and warmth. Physicians certified death, checking pupils, applying mirror to lips to ensure absence of breath. Heart did not beat. Brain electrical activity absent. All signs indicated end of biological existence. Protocol filled. Signature placed. Body prepared for autopsy, meant to explain cause of end. But belly still trembled, as if invisible feast continued inside, inaccessible to eyes of observers standing at threshold. Waves rolled under skin, rhythmic and strong, resembling beat of huge heart, hidden in depth of abdominal cavity. Tremor transmitted to floor, making instruments vibrate, lying on table next to body of deceased human. This movement did not correspond to state of corpse. It violated laws of physics and biology, asserting presence of life where there should be none. No one dared touch belly, fearing skin might open and release outward what ripened inside. Cross on ceiling seemed observer, silent witness of what happened in this room over last days. Would darken from time but did not cover with dust, as if invisible force cleaned space around holy symbol. Shadow from cross fell exactly on belly of deceased, connecting heaven and earth, spiritual and material in one point of tension. Priest invited for singing refused to enter, feeling cold coming from door of ward where body lay. He crossed himself and left, leaving physicians alone with problem, having no solution within framework of their faith. Atmosphere in infirmary changed forever. Fear penetrated bones of personnel, making them avoid this wing of building after sunset. Corridors seemed longer, shadows deeper. Sounds of steps echoed with echo that should not be in stone walls. Patients in other wards complained of hunger, waking in them at nights, demanding food more often than usual. Stocks again began vanishing, but now this happened without participation of one man, as if infection spread through entire institution. Hunger became contagious, transmitting through glance, through touch, through air breathed by all around. Chief surgeon stood by body, looking at trembling belly, understanding death of patient did not mean end of threat. Autopsy was meant to become key to understanding, but hands trembled at thought of first incision with scalpel. Instruments lay on table, cold and heavy, waiting moment when they would be put to use again, this time against dead flesh. He knew inside would be found not what pathologists expect to see, but something that would change representation of world. Risk was huge, but curiosity and duty demanded continue investigation despite warnings of instinct. Night again descended on city, covering buildings with dark blanket under which hid secrets not intended for human knowledge. Stars and sky flickered coldly, paying no attention to drama unfolding within walls of military infirmary. Wind strengthened, howling in pipes, bringing scent of burnt stuff, and earth mixed with aroma of fresh blood from operating rooms. Time flowed slowly, every minute stretched into eternity, while staff prepared for procedure that might become last in their career. They knew they crossed line beyond which there was no return to normal life and familiar science. Belly continued to tremble. Rhythm intensified, becoming louder, filling room with sounds similar to distant thunder before storm. Body lay motionless, but inside work boiled, completing cycle of transformation started many days ago in village under Paris. Energy accumulated, reaching critical point when shell had to yield to contents. Physicians stood in expectation, knowing morning would bring answers they might not want to hear or see. Story approached culmination where boundary between life and death, between human and gates, had to erase completely. The autopsy began by candlelight when the chief surgeon made the initial incision along the sternum. The flame flickered from a draft, although windows were tightly closed, casting long shadows on stone walls of the operating room. The knife entered too deep, meeting not soft tissues but something hard, slippery, resembling burnt skin. The blade did not cut flesh with expected ease but seemed to cut into dense rubber, resisting penetration. The surgeon pressed harder, feeling the instrument vibrate in hand, transmitting strange pulsation from body to palm. Air in room froze, saturated with smell of formalin and something ancient resembling dust of ages. They cut further, exposing the esophagus, width of which corresponded to a human arm covered in black film. The tissue did not bleed, wound edges remained dry as if sealed by time. Inside structure was visible, not resembling mucous membrane, but resembling inner surface of a shaft lined with dark stone. Walls of organ were thick, multilayered, hiding in their depth mechanical sounds, quiet clicks resembling work of a clock mechanism. The surgeon stopped for a moment to wipe sweat from forehead, but hand trembled when he felt a gaze from the side of the table. Inside lay stones, pieces of glass, rusted plates, scraps of fabric, all this interwoven into a single knot, pulsing in time with cooling blood. The knot was not static, it rotated slowly, moving objects inside itself, as if digesting not matter but the very essence of time. Stones were smooth, polished by acidic environment, glass lost transparency, turning into cloudy sand. Rusted plates had shape of gears, but did not fit any known mechanism stored in arsenals of the city. Scraps of fabric preserved patterns embroidered decades ago, threads did not rot but petrified in structure of the knot. The surgeon removed objects, sequentially laying them out on the marble table until his assistants began to retreat to the exit. Every artifact seemed familiar, too familiar, as if it belonged not to the patient but to those who once held it in their hands. A mountain of strange finds grew on the table, casting a shadow on white coats of observers. Marble-cooled objects, but they themselves radiated residual heat as if just taken from pockets of living people. Silence in room became ringing, broken only by clink of metal on stone at each new movement of the surgeon. Every artifact seemed familiar, too familiar, as if it belonged not to the patient but to those who once held it in their hands. The senior assistant recognized the handle of a scalpel missing from his set 10 years ago during first practice in this infirmary. The nurse identified a button from the uniform worn by her predecessor, disappeared under unexplained circumstances 5 years ago. Even the surgeon saw among chaos of objects a mirror which he lost in youth, considering it stolen by a thief in the market. Memory returned in fragments, linking past of staff with contents of dead stomach. Darkness inside the chest cavity did not smell of rot, it smelled of old paper, wax, and cold metal of the operating room. This aroma was smell of archives where reports on deaths are stored, smell of candles lit over coffins, smell of instruments awaiting use. It filled lungs, making breathing heavy, saturating blood with sense of inevitability. It seemed that the room itself became part of the body, and the body became part of the room, erasing boundaries between observer and object. Ventilation did not cope, smell absorbed into clothes, into skin, into hair of those standing at the table. Assistants retreated further, their backs pressed to cold wall, eyes widened from horror of realization. They understood that the patient did not just eat objects, he collected history of this place, absorbing evidence of other lives. Every lost tool, every forgotten item ended up here, preserved in acidic eternity of internal cavity. This was not digestion, this was archiving, collection of data about those who passed through doors of the infirmary. The surgeon continued work, driven by professional duty, but his hands became heavy as if filled with lead. On the table lay a watch, stopped at moment of death of previous chief physician, dial covered in cracks, hands bent. Next to it lay a ring with initials which no one could read, letters floated on metal, changing order. There were also children's toys forgotten by patients and documents signed with ink, disappeared from production 100 years ago. All this made up a mosaic of the past, collected in one place, in one body, becoming a repository of lost time. No one dared touch exhibits, fearing they would stick to fingers forever. Candlelight flickered stronger, although there was no draft. Flame leaned toward table as if attracted by a magnet. Shadows from objects merged into one big shadow, covering the surgeon, penetrating under the coat to the skin itself. He felt cold coming from marble, cold that could not be explained by temperature in the room. Fingers went numb holding tweezers, but he did not release instrument, continuing to extract new finds from depth. Each new object confirmed theory which mind refused to accept, demanding logical explanation. Deep inside the cavity there was still space. Space was not filled to limit despite quantity of extracted things. Walls of organ contracted, trying to hold remnants of contents, as if protecting last secret from prying eyes. The surgeon looked inside using a mirror and saw a reflection that did not correspond to his own face. In depth of dark shaft, something else looked, using eyes of patient as lenses for observation of world of living. This was not a body, this was a portal, using flesh as a shell for transition into another reality. Assistants whispered in corner, their voices sounded muffled, as if coming from underwater, violating ban on conversations in operating room. They discussed possibility to stop procedure, close body forget what was seen, but legs did not obey commands. Fear paralyzed while turning them into static figures, observing a ritual that should not be performed. The surgeon ignored them, focusing on the last, not holding entire construction of intestines together. He understood that if he cut it, he would release something that could not be returned back into limits of human anatomy. Smell intensified, becoming almost tangible, dense, like fog, hiding details of further actions. Paper rustled by itself, although there were no sheets on table. Sound came from inside chest cavity. Wax dripped from candles, forming figures resembling human silhouettes frozen in prayer or scream. Metal of instruments became covered with frost despite heat coming from body, creating contrast of ice and fire on table. Physics of room violated gradually, step by step, preparing space for final act of autopsy. The surgeon made a final pull, extracting a key that did not exist in nature, made of material resembling bone. The key did not fit any lock in the infirmary, but all felt that it opened something important. He placed key on table next to other artifacts and stepped back, wiping hands on bloody apron. Hands trembled, knees buckled, but he stood firm, looking at collected collection of other lives. Body on table seemed empty, a shell from which all essence was taken, leaving only form. Silence returned to operating room, but now it was different, filled with expectation of answer from dead flesh. Patient's belly did not move, skin became gray, finally losing signs of life, but tension in air did not subside. Assistants looked at surgeon, expecting order, word, any sign that one could exhale and leave. But surgeon was silent, looking at key, understanding that autopsy was not finished, that it only passed to another level. They opened not just a body, they opened reality itself, in which they existed last years. Candles burned out simultaneously, leaving room in semi-darkness, lit only by light from corridor penetrating through slightly open door. In darkness, objects on table began to glow faintly, each in its own rhythm, creating a map of constellations on marble surface. The surgeon understood that they became part of exposition, that their names too would one day appear on this table among other artifacts. Hunger did not die with body, it passed to next stage, demanding new carriers for storage of its collection. Autopsy ended, but absorption continued, invisible, inevitable, eternal. On the table lay not random debris, but tools missing from the infirmary archives over the last 10 years, things considered lost or written off after fires and thefts. The marble surface was strewn with metal and bone, glass and fabric, every detail of which had its own history recorded in loss registries. Dust on the objects was not ordinary household dirt, but a layer of time accumulated in dark corners of cabinets and basements where light did not penetrate. The surgeon looked at this collection of losses and felt cold penetrating under skin, freezing finger movements. Air in the operating room became viscous, filled with static tension, presaging a finale that could not be prevented. The surgeon recognized the scalpel handle used by his mentor, a man who disappeared suddenly 5 years ago without explanation. Wood on the handle was darkened by blood and time, but shape remained recognizable, as if instrument waited for this moment. Nearby lay a mirror left by predecessor, silver of which tarnished to blackness, hiding reflection of one who once looked into it. A piece of wire recorded in accident reports lay coiled in a ring resembling a wedding ring no one wore. Every object was testimony to someone's error, someone's disappearance, someone's secret preserved in acidic environment of human innards. He understood hunger did not belong to one person. It was a mirror reflecting greed of those who observed, measured, recorded. Physicians wanted to know, wanted to possess knowledge, wanted to control nature until flesh absorbed alien desires and began demanding their material embodiment. The patient did not eat just food. He consumed ambitions, fears, secrets of those standing on the other side of glass. The infirmary became feeder of monster. It created itself with own experiments, own records, own inattention to boundaries of permitted. Silence in room became absolute, broken only by heavy breathing of people realizing their complicity in catastrophe. While flesh absorbed alien desires, it transformed, becoming vessel for collective guilt of medical personnel. Every missing tool was symbol of negligence. Malpractice hidden from reports to preserve reputation of institution. Now they lay here exposed, cleansed of slime and blood, presenting accusation to those who held scalpels in hands. The surgeon felt gaze of dead man directed to ceiling, pressing on him heavier than any physical load. Candles burned out, wicks crackled, casting shadows that seemed living creatures crawling on walls of operating room. Trembling hands of surgeon accidentally touched blade left on edge of table among other artifacts of past. Sharp steel touched skin, causing no pain, only short sensation of coolness replaced by warmth of spreading liquid. Blood dropped on marble, dark red, thick, mixing with dust of ages, covering tools of deceased patient. Sound of drop falling sounded like gunshot in silence, making assistants flinch, although no one made a sound. In same moment in throat arose familiar constriction, dark, warm, inexorable, similar to what was described in observation journals. Sensation was not external but internal, as if someone ran finger along inner wall of esophagus, checking its capacity. The surgeon froze, holding bloody finger in air, understanding connection established not through air but through blood spilled on stone. Wound on hand did not hurt, skin edges did not separate, as if body already began healing process characteristic of one lying on table. He lowered gaze to own belly, feeling how skin stretches, becoming thin, transparent, exposing contours of organs beneath. Inside moved alien darkness, pulsing in rhythm that did not match beating of his own heart. Alien darkness inside him was not parasite in usual understanding, it was inheritance transmitted through touch to secret. Stomach clenched, demanding filling not with food but with essence, matter, weight that could be absorbed and dissolved in self. The surgeon stepped back, leaning on edge of table to not fall, but legs became cotton, refusing to hold weight of body. Assistants looked at him with horror, understanding infection was not bacterial, it was conceptual, transmitted through realization of truth. There was no exit. Door to operating room seemed distant, as if corridors stretched into infinity. He lowered gaze to own belly, feeling how skin stretches, how inside moves alien darkness, expanding boundaries of possible. Pulsation intensified, transmitting vibration into pelvic bones, into spine, into skull, filling every cavity of body with new content. Thoughts became alien memories of past operations, mixed with sensations of hunger that knew no saturation. He understood autopsy did not end with death of patient, it became ritual of transfer of baton requiring new carrier. Light in room flickered, ready to go out, completely leaving them alone with what awakened inside living. And outside window they were already bringing next patient, whose eyes glowed with same bottomless thirst as one who lay on table. Cart creaked on cobblestones, wheels stuck in mud, but horses did not stopping, drawn by invisible force to gates of infirmary. Figure in sack did not move, but air around cart vibrated, scaring birds and making dogs tuck tails. Guards at gates did not prevent entry, standing as if stuck with weapons lowered down in sign of powerlessness before inevitable. City slept, not knowing that inside walls of medical institution new grain already ripened, ready to sprout in minds of doctors. Eyes of new patient glowed with same bottomless thirst, reflecting in pupils fire of torches, illuminating path to doors of reception ward. This was not coincidence, this was cycle closed in moment when blood touched marble in operating room upstairs. The infirmary became incubator for something greater than disease, than death, than human understanding of limits of flesh. The surgeon at window saw approach of cart, but could not tear gaze away, as if his will was subordinate to rhythm of wheels. Inside him hunger stirred stronger, demanding exit, demanding meeting with one who rides into courtyard. Cycle closed, turning doctors into patients and patients into gates through which world lost its materiality. The surgeon stepped from window, feeling how steps become heavy, how every breath requires effort to not inhale too much reality. Assistants stood at table, not daring to approach him, knowing touch now dangerous, contagious, irreversible. They looked at own hands, seeing in them potential carriers, potential vessels for same darkness growing in chief physician. Protocol was violated, science retreated, yielding place to ancient law of absorption that knew no exceptions. Darkness inside surgeon grew, filling lungs, displacing air, replacing oxygen with need for expansion of space inside body. He stepped to door not to exit but to meet those who come to transfer to them baton of observation. Corridor behind door was dark, but at end of it light was visible coming not from lamps but from something living moving to operating room. Sounds of steps in corridor matched beating of his new heart counting time until moment when boundaries between them disappear. The infirmary ceased to be place of treatment becoming temple of insatiable emptiness demanding constant offerings. Finale came not with death but with acceptance when resistance became useless before face of eternal hunger. The surgeon placed hand on door handle feeling how metal heats from touch transmitting energy inside palm. He did not open door, it opened itself silently admitting into operating room smell of dampness earth and expectation coming from below. Shadows in corners of room thickened taking forms of those who once disappeared in these walls returning to demand their own. History did not end, it only began anew with new names, with new tools, with same unchanging essence. Below at gates cart stopped and sack slowly untied exposing face that was mirror reflection of face of surgeon. Same gaze, same pallor, same readiness to accept into self all that world offers to destroy it. Guards retreated into shadow allowing figure to rise and make first step onto territory that no longer belonged to people. The infirmary breathed walls expanded accommodating new reality where hunger was only law and saturation impossible dream. Candles in operating room went out completely leaving only light of eyes burning in dark like beacons for those who lost way.